Eli's late wife's wind chimes were stolen right off his porch after a bogus HOA violation from self-declared enforcer Karen Withers. Known for harassing neighbors over bird feeders and sidewalk chalk, Karen finally pushed too far. But Eli had one quiet, thunderous move left, and it rang out across the neighborhood like justice cast in bronze. Just wait until you hear how his 12-foot gong turned the tables, and why peace never sounded sweeter. Eli Harmon never gave much thought to the wind chimes that swayed gently above his back porch. They had been a small, thoughtful gift from his wife, Rebecca, picked up at some roadside craft fair during a lazy Sunday drive years ago. The chimes weren't flashy, just 5 slim aluminum tubes and a carved wooden clapper that clicked softly in the breeze like distant piano keys. After she passed, Eli left them hanging. Not out of sentiment, exactly. More out of instinct, like muscle memory. Removing them would have felt like erasing something. He never expected them to cause trouble. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. The sun had barely crested over the rooftops, and Eli had just stepped out with a mug of black coffee when he noticed something slapped dead center on his front door. Not slid gently into the mailbox, not tucked behind the handle like a flyer, but duct-taped, 4 thick strips, red like warning lights. The letter was printed in all caps, with oversized block font that looked like it came from a typewriter made by a drill sergeant. Noise violation, remove chimes immediately, final warning. Eli blinked at it, then blinked again. There was no official header, no city seal, no indication it came from any recognized agency, just a scribbled signature at the bottom, HOA Compliance Officer, K. Withers. That name stopped him cold. Karen Withers. She lived 3 houses down in a ranch style with fake shutters and a yard full of keep-off-grass signs, the type who power-washed her driveway every Saturday and scowled at trick-or-treaters for ringing the bell twice. She wore gardening gloves even in December, and once filed a complaint because a neighbor's garden hose was visibly coiled in a chaotic fashion. Karen had taken it upon herself, after the HOA formally dissolved 3 years ago, to act as its self-appointed enforcer. No one had asked her to, no one really listened, but that didn't stop her from creating her own newsletters, mailing out fines she couldn't legally issue, and patrolling the sidewalks with the intensity of someone training for a neighborhood Olympics nobody else had entered. Eli stared at the letter for a long moment. It would have been funny if it wasn't so bizarre. He wasn't even sure how wind chimes qualified as a noise violation. You had to be within 6 feet to hear them, and even then, only if you were trying. Still holding his coffee, he peeled the letter off his door, leaving behind faint gray smears from the tape. The absurdity of it made him laugh under his breath. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it in the trash without a second thought. Let her huff and puff, he figured. It's not like she has any actual authority. But the next day, when he got home from the hardware store, he stepped out of his truck and immediately noticed something wrong. The porch looked off. He walked around to the backyard, where the wind chimes should have been catching the late afternoon breeze. They were gone. The hook, the one Rebecca had screwed in herself, had been snipped clean. Not unscrewed. Cut. There were still tiny metal shavings on the deck, glinting in the sunlight like silver sawdust. Eli just stood there for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. Not just the fact that someone had trespassed, but the quiet, pointed violation of it. They hadn't just removed a decoration. They'd taken a piece of her, of them. The breeze rolled in, soft and silent now, and for the first time in a year, there was no sound, no delicate notes, no reminder of the woman he loved, just stillness, and a tightening knot in Eli's chest that told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Eli didn't sleep much that night. Something about the way the hook had been cut, not just removed, but deliberately snipped, stuck with him like a pebble in a shoe. It wasn't some random act. It was targeted, intentional. And deep down, he already knew who was behind it. By dusk, his frustration had outgrown his patience. He walked 3 houses down, fists shoved into the pockets of his flannel jacket, and rang Karen Withers' doorbell with the same calm a man might use to tap on a wasp's nest. She opened the door a few seconds later, as if she'd been waiting. Karen looked exactly as expected, gray cardigan, khakis, and her signature teal gardening gloves still on, even though the sun had gone down, and her lawn hadn't needed tending since mid-October. A thin clipboard rested in her arm like a badge of office. She smiled, but not the friendly kind. The corners of her mouth lifted just enough to show she thought she was in control. "I told you," she said before he could speak, "those chimes were in violation of community auditory guidelines." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Guidelines?" "Sound carries. People work from home. Some of us value peace and quiet." "They were barely audible," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Well," she replied, her tone dropping into something colder, "I could hear them." She looked directly at him when she said it, like she was daring him to argue. There was no remorse in her voice, no explanation, no compromise, just stubborn self-righteousness wrapped in the armor of authority no one had ever given her. Eli's jaw clenched. "Did you take them?" he asked evenly. Karen didn't flinch. She didn't nod. She didn't even blink. She simply turned and closed the door with the same slow, deliberate motion someone might use to hang up a phone mid-sentence. Eli stood there for a long moment, staring at the grain of her front door, listening to the metallic snick of the deadbolt sliding into place. The cool evening air settled around him. He didn't knock again. When he got home, he sat down at his computer and opened the neighborhood Facebook group. It wasn't large, maybe 60 members, mostly retirees and young families, but people paid attention. He typed slowly, deliberately. "Hi neighbors, yesterday the small wind chimes on my back porch disappeared. They were a gift from my late wife and meant a great deal to me. If anyone saw anything or knows what might have happened to them, I'd really appreciate any info. Thanks." He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. Within an hour, comments began to trickle in. It's terrible, Eli. So sorry. I saw those chimes. They were lovely. Not the first time something's just disappeared lately. She made my daughter cry over a chalk drawing last week. She left a note in our mailbox about our garden gnome, said it was aesthetically invasive. She told us we had to switch our grill to propane or else. What started as sympathy turned into a pattern. Small stories, quiet frustrations, long simmering tension that had clearly been building under the surface for months, maybe years. And suddenly, Eli wasn't just a grieving widower with a missing wind chime. He was the tipping point. That night, he sat alone in his backyard, with the porch light off, letting the cool breeze rustle through the trees. The hook on the eave of the porch was still there, empty now, like a button torn from a shirt. The silence was heavier than before. Eli wasn't a man prone to anger, but what he felt wasn't just about the wind chimes anymore. It was about the principle, the entitlement, the idea that someone like Karen could march around with her made-up rules and treat people like intruders in their own homes. Something inside him, something quiet and patient for far too long, started to stir. And this time, he didn't laugh. Eli wasn't impulsive by nature. He didn't yell, he didn't rant, but when something mattered, he acted with precision, the kind of quiet, deliberate energy you only learn after years of keeping your emotions tucked behind a calm expression. And the wind chimes had mattered, not just for what they were, but for what they stood for. So, over the next week, Eli did what he always did when life threw something unfair his way. He made a list. Then he started researching. Zoning ordinances, noise limits, sculpture exemptions. He called a few friends, one of them a retired city planner, another a sound engineer from his younger days working with AV systems. He checked county records, consulted a property attorney over coffee, and finally made a call to a name he'd been given by a neighbor who once ran a local art fair. The man on the other end had a raspy voice, a dry sense of humor, and as it turned out, a specialty in large-scale bronze sculpture. He was also a Navy veteran who loved creative challenges. 2 days later, Eli wired a deposit, and 3 weeks after Karen's smug little door slam, the flatbed truck arrived. It was early morning when the crate rolled into the cul-de-sac, massive and slow-moving, like a spaceship descending into a quiet neighborhood. The neighbors came out one by one, curious and cautious, pulling curtains aside, stepping onto porches with coffee mugs in hand. And then, like clockwork, came Karen. She stormed out in a housecoat and tennis shoes, clutching her ever-present clipboard like it was a holy relic. "What is that?" she snapped, pointing at the crate like it had personally insulted her begonias. Eli, standing beside the delivery crew, simply adjusted his hat. "Art," he said. The lid came off the crate with a mechanical hiss of pressure, revealing what could only be described as a statement. 12 feet tall, nearly 900 pounds. A gleaming bronze gong, perfectly circular, its surface polished to such a high shine that it reflected the sky like liquid fire. It stood on a custom steel frame with curved supports. Elegant, architectural, unmistakably intentional. And it had been placed precisely where the old wind chimes had once hung, dead center in Eli's backyard, just visible from the street through a break in the hedges. The sculptor had done more than build a monument. He had created a presence. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Eli didn't offer further explanation. He didn't need to. The following afternoon at exactly 5:03 p.m., just as Karen began her daily ritual of watering her carefully arranged flower beds, a deep, resonant sound rolled across the neighborhood. Gong. It wasn't obnoxiously loud. It didn't shatter windows or set off alarms, but it vibrated the air in a way that couldn't be ignored, like thunder on a clear day. It echoed between houses, hummed in the sidewalk, seemed to hang in the air even after it stopped. Karen shrieked so loudly that a flock of birds scattered from her roof. The next day, he did it again. Same time, same strike. Children started calling it the boom. Neighbors smiled behind their hands. One even recorded it and uploaded the clip to a local community group with the caption, "Eli's new instrument slaps." Karen, meanwhile, went on the offensive. She called the police. They came, took one look, and politely informed her that art installations were perfectly legal as long as they were under 1,000 pounds and didn't obstruct public pathways. She filed a noise complaint with the city. Eli hired a licensed sound technician to run a formal decibel reading. The gong's output was well below the municipal noise threshold, just under the max limit for outdoor wind instruments. He kept the documentation in a manila folder, just in case. Karen tried claiming the vibrations were damaging her soil structure. No one responded. By the end of the week, her begonias looked exactly the same. But her composure did not. Every clang of the gong wasn't just a sound. It was a message. Not loud, not cruel, but immovable. The same way a mountain doesn't shout, but simply exists. Too large to be ignored. Too permanent to challenge. And Eli, he struck it once a day. No more, no less. Not out of spite, but out of rhythm. He wasn't just proving a point. He was reclaiming his silence, on his own terms. Karen's last attempt came in the form of a clipboard and a forced smile. She went door to door with the same tone she used when demanding people edge their lawns. Firm, rehearsed, and slightly desperate. Her petition to remove the auditory hazard from Eli Harmon's backyard was met mostly with polite nods, half-closed doors, and awkward silences. Out of 43 homes in the neighborhood, she collected exactly 2 signatures, hers and her husband's. And even that second one looked like it had been added with reluctant handwriting. The rest of the neighborhood had made up its mind. Some ignored her entirely. A few simply said, "He's within his rights." Others offered thinly veiled smirks, or outright thanked Eli the next time they saw him mowing his lawn. No one missed the irony. For all her years of complaints about chimes, chalk, and gnomes, it was her voice that had finally gone unheard. A week later, as the last of the autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalks, and the air turned brisk with the promise of winter, Eli opened his front door to find something taped gently to the wood. It wasn't red. It wasn't duct-taped. It was a single folded note, handwritten on a small sheet of cream stationery. "I miss her too. The chimes were beautiful. The gong's not bad either." There was no name, just a soft kind of honesty that stopped him cold. Eli read it twice, then once more. He stood on the porch for a long moment, his fingers resting on the edge of the note, the air crisp around him. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops and the neighborhood settled into twilight, Eli stepped into his yard with a cup of black coffee in one hand and a small mallet in the other. He didn't strike the gong once. He struck it 3 times. Gong, gong, gong. Each note echoed out across the cul-de-sac, deep and resonant, not with anger, but with meaning. It was a sound of memory, of closure, of peace. Karen didn't say another word. She didn't post. She didn't knock. She simply hired a landscaping crew to plant hedges high enough to block her view of Eli's yard. Whether it was her final act of defiance or surrender, no one could say for sure. But she never approached him again. And Eli? He made a quiet ritual of it. Every evening around sunset, he'd sit beside the sculpture with his coffee, sometimes reading a book, sometimes just listening to the breeze. And at precisely 5:03 p.m., he'd rise, step forward, and let the gong sing. It wasn't revenge anymore. It wasn't protest. It was remembrance. Where there was once silence forced on him, there was now sound. Steady, strong, and wholly his. A song that didn't ask for permission. A note that couldn't be stolen. Justice, it turned out, had a rhythm, and Eli had finally found his.